Sorry, technical difficulties. This webcam has been a little bit buggy the last day or two, as if I need any more trouble, but I won't complain. I'm sure you all have your own difficulties and challenges. In any case, as I was saying, human beings not only benefit in a chemical sense from the nutrients that we ingest from the environment, we can come up with philosophical systems, we can come up with artistic celebrations, we can come up with, spiritual philosophies and religions that value the whole of creation. And these are equally needs. Right? Human beings have a need not only to ingest nutrients from nature, we need relationships with each other, and we need meaning, right? We need forms of legitimate governance, right? We're not a wolf pack, right? In situations of social breakdown, we can behave like a wolf pack, but human political systems are legitimated. And so the scope of our needs goes far beyond mere nature, but they are all equally needs. McMurtry defines needs in terms of harm. Right? In one of his earliest systematic expositions of life value philosophy, it's called Unequal Freedoms, published in 1998. He defines needs according to the following criterion. N is a need if and only if, and to the extent that deprivation of N regularly results in harm, and harm takes the form of reduction in organic capacity. So reduction in our ability to feel, to move and build creatively, and to think. Right? So if that's the case, then education is a need, because if we don't satisfy our need for education, our capacity to think is harmed and limited. We have a need for meaningful life activity, right? If we don't, then our capacities to create and contribute and to feel and value ourselves, our lives as meaningful and worthwhile is diminished. And who can say that that is not a need, right? Serious forms of mental illness, up to and including suicide, occur because people don't feel valued. They feel that their lives are meaningless. So there's no greater harm than early death. So if this is true, then we can say that we need meaning every bit as much as we need food. The point is, right, Donnelly, or this is an argument against Donnelly. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to impose McMurtry's views as true, or baruchello and johnstone's views as true, or my views as true. But I propose that, this represents an important criticism of Donnelly's argument to the effect that rights cannot be grounded in needs. Baruchello and Johnstone, as well as my own version that we'll talk about next time on the next video in the next set of notes, is that rights have to be grounded in needs. Otherwise, we don't understand why it's so important to satisfy them. If these rights are fundamental, if they protect things that are fundamental to being human, then they must protect things that we need, because that's why we're entitled to them. We're entitled to them, whether it's in education or access to health care or food or democratic government or some kind of legitimate government. Why else would we be entitled to them unless we were harmed if we were deprived of them? And so if we define need in terms of harm, this provides the philosophical explanation and justification of why these are human rights. All of us, any human being anywhere, would be harmed if we are deprived of them. So here's the life value synthesis. The life value synthesis is precisely that we don't need some as yet undefined set of rights. What we need to understand is those rights affirmed by the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well as the Universal Declaration and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have to understand these not as mandating one specific form of satisfying the needs, but as asserting the universality of the need and therefore linking legitimacy and social justice to the satisfaction of the needs. We need food, right? That doesn't mean we all need to eat meat. And if we eat meat, it doesn't mean we all need to eat pork, right? And if we're vegetarians, it doesn't mean that we all need to be vegans, right? It means that we need to ingest nutritious substances to fuel the chemical processes our life depends upon, okay? We can then sort out, as an intelligent species, in relation to different ethical and cultural and traditional considerations and religious considerations, what anyone in particular will eat. Orthodox Jews and Muslims won't eat pork. That's not a problem. They still need food. Orthodox Hindus won't eat beef. That's fine. They still need to eat food. Vegans won't eat cheese. No one should force them, right? We can find our own ethical and cultural path forward while still recognizing the universality of need. If education is essential to the development of our cognitive capacities, it doesn't mean everyone has to study philosophy or physics or mathematics. It means without some form of education, our capacity to think, reason, communicate, listen, etc. won't develop, and we all need to develop it. So Baruchello and Johnstone worked through the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights systematically, reading each of the rights asserted as a life value. And so their argument cuts both ways. Against critics like Teeple, they would argue that you're getting hung up on an ideological use of rights. Of course we should criticize the corporate rights to appropriate whole fields of reality to exploit for their own profit, as opposed to using it to satisfy needs. Of course, corporations try to exploit rights for their own advantage. Of course, we should resist culturally imperialist interpretations of rights. Right? They might say with Matua. But again, they don't have to be imposed in a culturally imperialist way. There's nothing essentially European about eating or education or legitimate forms of government. Right? Imposing a European-style parliament on a traditional indigenous society might be culturally imperialist, right? But removing that so that that community could reinvigorate its traditional forms of government, which it finds legitimate and which all members can participate in their own way, that is still satisfying the right for legitimate government. So too food, so too meaningful forms of life activity. If we all have a right to have our needs comprehensively satisfied so that we can contribute to our social world in a meaningful, valuable, and valued way, that doesn't mean we all have to be the same thing, right? It doesn't mean we all have to believe the same thing. Right? I've developed life value philosophy in a materialist and atheistic way. Baruchello, who I went to grad school with him, he has a more spiritual dimension, right? McMurtry has a more holistic development which tries to get beyond oppositions like belief in God or not belief in God. We all agree, and yet we all agree on the value of life value philosophy, and we articulate it in different ways. So how does this impact issues of social justice? Well, let's recall the working definition of social justice, which asserted, and I'm working from memory here, I don't have the words in front of me, but it says that social justice is any state of society in which the non-optional needs of human beings are satisfied for the sake of the free development of life capacities in meaningful, valuable, and valued ways, which are sustainable over an open-ended future and don't depend on the exploitation of others. Doesn't that now kind of connect with all of the different arguments that we've read if we interpret human rights in a life valuable way? Life value presupposes a sustainable natural environment. If there's no natural environment, there's no life of any sort. Plants, animals, humans, we're all gone. So if human rights are interpreted in a way which permits the unsustainable destruction of the natural world, that's an incoherent interpretation of the human right. But we don't then discard the human right as nothing but bourgeois or capitalist ideology. We reinterpret it such that it protects what it must protect if there are to be human beings to live and grow and thrive and connect and do whatever it is that we do. Likewise, the world has different cultures, different religious traditions. If human rights are interpreted in a way that makes only one form of culture normative and therefore destroys the lives of other cultures, that's an incoherent interpretation of the human right. The human is the diversity of the cultures, right? Matua made a similar point. But Baruchello and Johnstone's interpretation would argue against Matua that, yes, there are culturally imperialist and colonialist uses of human rights, but those have to be misinterpretations. How can a human right destroy human life? That's incoherent. We resolve it by reinterpreting the right in a life-valuable way. Life value philosophy thus looks for a synthetic understanding of human rights that allows for and explains how different cultures, traditions, and societies can all enable their individual members to thrive and develop and act as human beings, as intelligent, creative agents, but not all in exactly the same way. So that's the life value synthesis, and that's how it connects up with the working definition of social justice. We can see now, I think, and we'll see even more clearly when we turn to my essay next time we virtually meet like this, that I came up with the working definition of social justice on the basis of my own work and McMurtry's work and Baruchello and Johnstone's work in reinterpreting human rights from a life-valuable perspective. But don't all of the thinkers that we have read presuppose, without using the language, presuppose the principles of life value philosophy? Donnelly is concerned, above all, with the goodness of human life. He wants human beings to be able to exercise their agency, right, as creative, creative, dignified beings. And therefore, he says human rights have to protect and ensure access to whatever it is that that allows us to develop as agents. In other words, what we need, right? So he gets hung up on an overly restricted conception of need, but I don't think his argument is fundamentally at odds with life value philosophy. Abu Lughod argued that instead of fixating on different cultural traditions, we should examine the global political economy and how that has imposed impoverished circumstances on especially women in the global south, and how that disempowers them, right? So disempowerment is not signified through cultural traditions or forms of dress or beliefs. It's signified in not being able to access the more basic need satisfiers that anyone has to access in order to live. Solve that problem, then let women and men decide as they will about how they will present themselves in public, right? So there too, we see an underlying connection to the life to the life ground of value. Right? Tiepel, right? Tiepel's critique of human rights was focused on the way in which human rights have been Tiepel focused on the way in which human rights have co-evolved with a liberal capitalist society, and therefore justify its underlying social relationships. Right? But from a life ground perspective, that recognizes only one side of human rights. Right? It ignores the other side. Tiepel claims that social, cultural, and economic rights are only countervailing rights against corporate rights. Baruchello and Johnstone argue, yeah, they're countervailing rights, so push the logic of their countervailing force against the corporate rights. Expose the corporate rights as the perversion. Right.